Welcome everyone on this very rainy, very wet June evening. Thank you everyone for coming. Let me first of all acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Wajak people of the Noongar Nation, the rightful owners and the caretakers of this country, which now we call home. We pay our respects to the elders, both past and present, and recognize their enduring connection to this land. My name is Soumya. I'm a volunteer at the Sacred India Gallery since about 10 years now. And I'm so happy that we're all gathered here to go a little bit deeper than Darwin. You might be wondering what that name is, deeper than Darwin. It's kind of a funny name, isn't it? Well, I first came across Michael Cremo's work almost 15 years ago. I was in the final years of my PhD, living in Singapore at the time. And it's only in February of this year I had the good fortune to meet Michael for the very first time in person. We had very many wonderful conversations. I learned a lot from him. And in one of those conversations, Michael told me that he's visiting Darwin this year in June to attend the World Archeological Congress. And I said, Michael, Darwin's up north and we're just a little bit further south. Why don't you come a little bit deeper than Darwin? Very graciously, Michael accepted our invitation, and here he is. Thank you for coming to Perth, Michael. This is his very first trip to Perth. He's been to Australia. This is his third trip to Australia, the very first one on the West Coast. So tonight's talk is about Michael's wonderful research that he's done now for nearly 40 years, studying human antiquity and archaeology. And this is work that he's been presenting all over the globe for 40 years. He's presented at places such as the Royal Institution of London, the Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow, Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, European Association of Archaeologists, World Archeological Congress, and many, many other places. Michael's also a prolific author. He's authored a lot of books, and the very first book that he wrote on archaeology, it's called Forbidden Archeology. It's a massive 700-page document, book, and I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about exciting discoveries that he's made. An abridged version of Forbidden Archeology is called The Hidden History of Human Race, which has been translated into over 20 languages. His most recent book is Extreme Human Antiquity, Further Investigations into Forbidden Archeology. It documents evidence for extreme human antiquity that has come to his attention since the publication of his first book, Forbidden Archeology. Just a few housekeeping information before we get started. Water stations have been set up right outside in the foyer area, and toilet access is just outside as you cross the foyer. In case of emergency, please follow the hotel staff. I'll just very briefly share a review that came out in many of Michael's work. This is from Walter J. Langbein, who's the editor of the Para magazine. He says, if we imagine the history of humanity as a giant museum containing all knowledge on this topic, then we shall find that several of the rooms of this museum have been locked. Scientists have locked away the facts that contradict the generally accepted picture of history. Michael Cremo and Richard Thompson have, however, opened many of the locked doors and allowed laymen as well as scientists to see inside. Even scientists have been influenced, and rightly so. The hidden history of human race compels the world of science to enter new territories and calls into question many revered theories about humanity and human history. Without further ado, let's welcome Michael to Perth and tonight's talk.
I hadn't planned to be here until Sonia invited me to Perth, which I hear is the second most isolated city in the world. So actually, we checked on ChatGPT, and apparently you've reached number one. So I'm kind of used to being isolated. So I feel really at home here. I'm very pleased that so many of you showed up this evening to hear something deeper than Darwin. My work is inspired by my studies in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, especially the Puranas. Those are the Vedic histories, and they contain accounts of human populations that have existed on this planet in very distant times, going back millions of years. That's something quite different than I learned from my teachers in high school and university. The common consensus among scientists today is that the first human beings like us appeared less than 300,000 years ago on this planet. But when I did 8 years of research into the entire history of archaeology, looking at original reports by archeologists, geologists, other scientists digging into the earth, I found reports of many discoveries of human bones, human artifacts, human footprints, far older than 300,000 years. So the real picture, if one looks at all of the available evidence, and not just the selected evidence we find in today's textbooks, we see a picture emerging of coexistence of different types of humans, intermediates between humans and ancient apes, and apes and monkeys. Now, a lot of this evidence that I'm speaking about is no longer current. So why is that? It has something to do with Charles Darwin, one of the most influential intellectuals in the history of the earth. And in 1859, he published his revolutionary book, The Origin of Species. And in it, he proposed something different than was commonly accepted in his day, namely that God had created, the different forms of life that we see on this planet, the human beings, the plants, the animals. So scientists all over Europe were won over by his ideas, and they began to search for what they called a missing link, a creature intermediate, the fossil remains of something intermediate between the ancient apes and the modern humans. And they began to excavate all over Europe and other parts of the world. But what they were finding was not evidence for a missing link. They were finding evidence that human beings like us were existing in very ancient times, going back many millions of years. I'll give some examples of some of the discoveries that were made in the aftermath of Darwin's publication of The Origin of Species, which set off this hunt for a missing link. This is Dr. J.D. Whitney. He was the chief government geologist of California. He published this report about discoveries made in the gold mining regions of Central California. The discoveries included human bones, like that skull, and many human artifacts, like these stone mortars and pestles. According to modern geologists, the layers of rock in which these objects were found are from the early Eocene period, which means they would be about 50 million years old. Some of the discoveries were made at Table Mountain in Central California. You can see that this low mountain, the top of it is composed of layers of basalt. This is one of the discoveries that was made in a mine, a gold mine that was dug into the side of that mountain. Llewellyn Pierce said this mortar was found in the Boston Tunnel Company mine. He said it was dug up by me about the year 1862 under Table Mountain in gravel at a depth of about 200 feet from the surface, under the basalt, which was 60 feet deep and about 1,800 feet in from the mouth of the tunnel. So many objects like this were found, and they were reported by Whitney in a publication that came out from Harvard University's Museum of Comparative Zoology. In the report by Dr. Whitney, he mentioned some discoveries that were made in Europe by Carlos Ribeiro, who was the chief of the Geological Survey of Portugal. He discovered many human artifacts in his country of Portugal in layers of rock that dated to the Miocene period, the early Miocene period, in green there, which means they would be about 20 million years old. Being the head of this geological survey, he was also a director of the Museum of Geology in Lisbon. And he displayed the artifacts in that museum. And I got permission from the directors of the museum to study them and photograph them. And these are some of the objects. Now, they may look primitive, but we have to keep in mind that even today, there are human beings, such as the Hadia tribe in Ethiopia, who still make and use similar stone tools of a very simple type. So they are the type of object that archaeologists normally attribute to anatomically modern humans. Now, I just gave two examples of discoveries for evidence of humans existing many millions of years ago. Now, there were many more than two. There were hundreds of these discoveries, which I documented in my book, Forbidden Archeology. Now, why are they absent from today's textbooks? At the time those discoveries were made, there wasn't a fixed timeline for evolution. The idea had just come to the attention of scientists. They really hadn't figured out the timeline for it. So if somebody happened to discover evidence for human beings existing millions of years ago, it didn't violate any fundamental principle. But what happened in 1892 was that there was a claim that a missing link had been found. Eugene Dubois, who was a Dutch researcher, went to Java, which at that time was a Dutch colony. And at the Trinil site, he found evidence for a creature that he called Pithecanthropus erectus. So this discovery was very important for this reason. The Java man Pithecanthropus erectus discovery was dated as being about 800,000 years old. So scientists now had a fixed point of time. If you have the missing link, the intermediate creature, at 800,000 years, then according to the theory of evolution, the anatomically modern humans would have had to have come into existence sometime after that. So what happened to all the evidence that had been accumulated since 1859 to 1892, showing that human beings had been existing for millions of years? When this Java man discovery became accepted, that other evidence was forgotten, put aside, cast into oblivion, ignored, in some cases actively suppressed. So then the problem became, well, if we're going to ignore that evidence, then at what point after 800,000 years did humans come into existence, humans like us, the first Homo sapiens? That's now put at about 300,000 years. So here's what happened to Whitney's discoveries based on the Java man discoveries. William H. Holmes was a physical anthropologist at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., and he said, perhaps if Dr. Whitney had fully appreciated the story of human evolution as it is understood today, he would have hesitated to announce the conclusions he formulated, notwithstanding the imposing array of testimony with which he was confronted. Now, let me translate that for you. It's he said, if the facts don't fit the theory, even an imposing array of facts, you should realize they couldn't possibly be true. And specifically, he made reference to the Java man discoveries. He suggested that Whitney's evidence should be rejected because, quote, it implies the human race older by at least one half than Pithecanthropus erectus of Dubois, which may be regarded as an incipient form of human only. Again, the point, if you have your missing link at 800,000 years, what do you do with evidence that is millions of years older than that? So the same thing happened to Carlos Ribeiro. He discovered many human artifacts like this pointed flint object from Morganiero. And he displayed that in the museum with labels indicating an age of 5 million years at least from the Miocene period. But when he died, his colleagues in the museum did something very interesting. They left the object on display in the museum, but they wrote a new label for it. And the second line gives the age. It says Paleolitico Superior. That's the upper Paleolithic period. So the museum officials thought, okay, the upper Paleolithic period, that goes back about 20,000 years. That seems reasonable. 20 million years, the age that Ribeiro gave to the object, they thought that can't possibly be true because of this Javaman discovery. So the next generation of officials in the museum just put the entire collection away. And I was the first researcher to see them in over 50 years. Now, these kinds of discoveries are there in museums. I've been there and I've seen them. These objects aren't displayed to the public. And unless you are someone like me, you would never guess that these things are there. Actually, it was kind of interesting. I presented a paper on this work of Carlos Ribeiro and what happened to him at a meeting of the European Association of Archeologists that took place in Lisbon. It was a very interesting experience. Later, that paper was published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal called the Journal of Iberian Archaeology, which deals specifically with the archaeology of Spain and Portugal. So, given the importance of this Pithecanthropus erectus discovery, the publication of it is shown here by Dubois. We should carefully look at that discovery and see if it deserves the attention it got. Actually, only 2 bones were found, also a tooth, but basically the discovery amounted to a skull cap with protruding brow ridges, which is an ape-like feature, and a femur that was not quite human, but human-like. Dubois put the two together and based simply on those bones, reconstructed this whole picture of Pithecanthropus erectus and how he was living. What many people aren't aware of is that later in the 20th century, some British scientists carefully studied the femur that had been reported by Dubois, and they determined it was identical to that of an anatomically modern human, and it was different from any Homo erectus femur that was found afterwards. These days, scientists, they no longer call Dubois' discovery Pithecanthropus, they call it Homo erectus. So it's interesting because the skull, which is on the left there, circled in red, and the femur on the right, circled in red, were both found in the same formation, along with the bones of hundreds of other animals. So they were discovered about 15 meters apart. So it's questionable whether those two really belong to the same creature. To me, it seems more reasonable to say that it's evidence of two kinds of creatures: anatomically modern human beings, as testified to by the anatomically modern human femur, and some type of ape or monkey or possibly intermediate type of creature, intermediate between ancient apes and modern humans. There are populations of both existing 800,000 years ago, not far from here, actually. So, so as a result of this missing link, the Java Man discovery that was inspired by Darwin's theory, a huge body of evidence had been eliminated that occurred before the Java Man discoveries and afterwards. And one result of it is that when any scientist, archeologist or geologist or paleontologist finds evidence for a human presence going back very far in time, it's reinterpreted in such a way as to fit the modern dominant paradigm in the world of archaeology. I'll give a few examples. In 2013, at a place called, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly, if there's anyone who knows how to pronounce the name of this place, I call it Hoppiesburg. That's what it looks like to me. Any UK residents? All right. So we're in the second or most isolated part of the world. So what was discovered there was footprints. They were found at this place, and the archaeologists who discovered them carefully measured them, studied them, analyzed them, and they determined they were not different from footprints of living populations of anatomically modern humans, such as Native American Indians and Eskimos. So the archaeologists who discovered them did not attribute them to Homo sapiens, because according to their ideas, Homo sapiens didn't exist until 300,000 years ago. Wasn't existing at that time. So who was existing at that time? Many archaeologists in Europe would say it was Homo antecessor, who was a creature somewhat like Homo erectus, but existing in Europe at that time. So this is what I call knowledge filtration. You know, if human beings like us were present at that time, up to about 1 million years ago, walking on some beach sand, because that's where this occurred. It was on the shore of the North Sea. They would have made footprints exactly like those that were found. So you could take them as evidence for anatomically modern humans existing almost 1 million years ago in Northern Europe. But another way to do it is to say, well, there must have existed some type of intermediate being, some type of hominid that had feet exactly like modern human feet, but otherwise was completely different. Now you know what side I'm going to come down on. It's a similar type of case. In 2015, a publication came out in Nature Communications where some archaeologists reported the discovery of a finger bone. They technically called it the OH86 finger bone, Olduvai hominid 86. And the discovery was made at Olduvai Gorge in the country of Tanzania in East Africa. And it was found in a formation 1.8 million years old. Now, it may seem like a really minor thing, little finger bone, but there's something important that can be learned from this. So the finger bone was this one here. Technically, it's called the left fifth proximal manual phalanx, but it's that little bone there in your little finger. And the scientists who discovered it carefully measured it. I'm not just talking about the length and the width, I'm talking about very detailed measurements and angles. And they compared the measurements of this finger bone with the same finger bone that's found in apes and monkeys, chimpanzees, gorillas, macaques, baboons, different species of Australopithecus and Homo erectus, and they compared it with the same finger bone in populations of modern humans. And they found it fit squarely in the human group, after they analyzed it. But here's what they said in their report. And you pay close attention here because you can see the point I'm trying to make. They said, OH86 represents a hominin species whose closest form affinities are to modern Homo sapiens. However, the geological age of OH86 obviously precludes its assignment to Homo sapiens. Now, I'll translate that for you. We're saying, we've got this finger bone, OH86. It's exactly like modern Homo sapiens, but we can't call it Homo sapiens because of the geological age of the formation in which it's found. But why not? This is a phenomenon. I mean, I'm not the only one who says these kinds of things. These things have been noticed by historians of science and philosophers of science. For example, Thomas Kuhn, who wrote the book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and popularized the term paradigm, to indicate the body of knowledge that a particular discipline relies on, its methodologies, what is considered good evidence, bad evidence, what conclusions they've reached from their study. That scientific work that goes on in terms of that paradigm is called normal science. So he wrote, no part of the aim of normal science is to call forth new sorts of phenomenon. Indeed, those that will not fit in the box are often not seen at all. In other words, evidence for extreme human antiquity can be staring scientists in the face, but they won't see it as that because it just doesn't, they want to interpret everything to fit within their paradigm. It's kind of natural in a way. So, and then they don't see it for what it is. So I personally see no reason that OH86 shouldn't be assigned to Homo sapiens and be given an age of 1.84 million years. Now, some people will say, well, but there is no evidence that human beings existed at that time. The reason there's no evidence is because every time something is found like that, be it the Habsburg footprints, the OH86 finger bone. They just say, well, it can't be Homo sapiens. So if you proceed in that way, then you can happily just put the evidence that makes sense to you in the textbooks, and everything else, has to be wrong because it contradicts our paradigm. So I documented hundreds of such cases in this book, Forbidden Archeology, which is 900 pages long, not 700. Some people call it forbidding archaeology, which is why we brought out a shorter edition, The Hidden History of the Human Race. But guess what? The 900-page book keeps outselling the abridged version. It seems that people who are interested in these things want to not miss anything. So this evidence contradicts the current paradigm. And one response of the scientists who read the book and reviewed it, the book made a big splash in the world of science when it first came out. And it attracted about a dozen reviews in major journals of archaeology and anthropology and history of science. So one reviewer wrote, he was Ken Fader, an anthropologist, he wrote in Geoarchaeology, when you attempt to deconstruct a well-accepted paradigm, it is reasonable to expect that a new paradigm be suggested in its place. Now, it's a perfectly reasonable request. Actually, Richard Thompson and I, when we were writing Forbidden Archeology, we originally intended to have the alternative in the same book as the one we were working on. But as our research proceeded, we kept finding more and more cases of this knowledge filtration operating in archaeology, where evidence was interpreted in such a way to fit the dominant paradigm. Evidence that had previously been reported was ignored. And so we had to postpone the alternative to another book. But in one sense, I'm glad that it worked out that we just presented the archaeological evidence and not the alternative, because that left readers free to think about what their alternative would be. And they would write to me. Some would propose extraterrestrials as the explanation for the anomalous discovery. Some would propose time travelers left these artifacts in the ancient layers of rock. Some were proposing a new theory of evolution, with humans evolving far earlier than now seems possible. So I think that's good, that people think about these things. My answer to the question was that before we even asked the question, where did human beings come from, we should first of all understand what is a human being. Because if we don't know what it is we're trying to explain, how will we ever know if we explained it or not? So today, many scientists will say that a human being or any other living thing is a machine made of matter. It's a very common idea. We're molecular machines. But a question comes up, and Darwin himself raised this question in his notebooks that he wrote during the time he was trying to put his book, Origin of Species, together. We have something in common, Charles Darwin and I. We both take many years to write a book. Some people tell me when I've been giving lectures, people afterwards will tell me, Michael, maybe you're a reincarnation of Charles Darwin. And that's why you have to go around the world giving these lectures and go to places like Darwin, Australia. So Darwin asked the big question, how does consciousness commence? Because this is a big problem for those who think we're just molecular machinery, we're machines made of matter. Where do you get consciousness? And he recognized it was a problem for his theory. And he thought consciousness may be a secretion of the brain. In other words, the brain produces consciousness. And he thought that's what the answer was, but he was never able to prove it. Eventually, he concluded in a book he wrote, Descent of Man, in 1871, in what manner the mental powers were first developed in the lowest organisms is as hopeless an inquiry as how life itself first originated. These are problems for the distant future. The distant future has arrived, and these are still problems. Later this year, actually in July, not too long from now, I'm going to a conference that I've been attending for a few years now, the Science of Consciousness. And there you have some of the world's leading cognitive scientists, neuroscientists, psychologists, many others who are specifically studying this problem. And actually, one of your Australian colleagues, Chalmers, Dr. Chalmers, kind of came up with the phrase, the hard problem of consciousness. Nobody's got it figured out up to this very day. So you have prominent philosophers of science who focus on consciousness, like John Searle, saying, consciousness is something of a scandal because we do not have an adequate neurobiological theory of consciousness, and there are rather large numbers of false claims made about it. So, and this is also true of the origin of life from chemicals. It's an article of faith, bedrock faith, that life came from chemicals, but no scientist has actually shown how it has happened. So Darwin's prediction was true. It's kind of perpetually going to be a problem for scientists in the future, the distant future. So one option is to kind of continue trying to somehow or other figure out how consciousness comes from matter. Or you could change the ontology. Ontology means what exists in the world. So I'm proposing that if we actually look at all of the evidence, see, we've gotten a little far from the stones and bones of forbidden archaeology, but that's where this always leads, inevitably, to questions related to consciousness. So I would say consciousness has its own separate ontological existence. And matter has its own separate ontological existence. But there's also something called mind. It's not a simple duality. There's actually a third element that has to be considered. And just like we can observe states of our gross physical body, you can say, oh, it's a little cold in here, it's a little hot. We can also observe states of our mind. I'm feeling very peaceful today. My mind is agitated and disturbed today by so many things that there are. But so the question is, who is the I? Or what is the I that is perceiving and noticing these mental activities and the activities and sensations that come from our gross physical body? You can think of it in terms of a computer analogy. The gross physical body is like the computer hardware. The mental body, I'm going to use that term, that mental body, that aura of the mind that is associated with us, is like the software that allows the user, the actual conscious self that exists apart from mind, apart from matter, it allows it to interact with the hardware of the material body. Now, what I'm doing there is I'm introducing new substances. Today's science is based on the fact that the only thing that really exists is matter. And from it are temporarily generated consciousness and mind. But some scientists will object, you can't do that. That's not the way that science works. We try to explain everything in terms of what we know, but that's not how modern science really works. If we look at astrophysics, we can see that scientists had a hard time explaining the spiral structure of galaxies based on the assumption that the only thing operating is ordinary matter operating according to known gravitational laws. They found using that assumption, they couldn't explain the spiral structure of galaxies. So to explain it, they proposed there was missing mass, and that missing mass was supplied by a strange new subject they called dark matter, which you can't directly perceive, but it's only known by its inferred effects. So, but even that wasn't enough. So they had to propose even something more, dark energy, which has a force operating in the opposite manner of gravity. Gravity attracts, dark energy pushes things outward. And they had to come up with that because they noticed that the rate of expansion of the universe was accelerating. And they had no explanation for it other than proposing this new substance, which is unobservable. So today, most cosmologists believe that the cosmos is made of 5% ordinary matter, 30% dark matter, and 65% is due to dark energy. So I'm proposing the same sort of thing is necessary in biology. To explain what we actually observe, I think we have to introduce this mind substance and this consciousness substance. And Now, there are philosophers of science who agree that things really can't be explained without doing something like that. This is Thomas Nagel. He wrote an interesting book called Mind and Cosmos. The subtitle is interesting. Why the materialist neo-Darwinian conception of nature is almost certainly false. He got in a lot of trouble for writing this book, but he pointed out major scientific advances often require the creation of new concepts postulating unobservable elements of reality. The evidence for the existence of such things is precisely that if they existed, they would explain what is otherwise incomprehensible. And he pointed out consciousness is the most conspicuous obstacle to a comprehensive naturalism that relies only on the resources of science. If we take this problem seriously and follow out its implications, it threatens to unravel the entire naturalistic worldview. In other words, we're moving towards a consciousness-based picture of the universe rather than the matter-based conception that is now dominant in the world of science. And I think this has some very negative effects. He also, just kind of summarizing it, he wrote, conscious subjects and their mental lives are inescapable components of reality not describable by the physical sciences. Like, sometimes people used to talk about the soul, and scientists would say, well, we can't accept that. That's religion. That requires belief. That requires faith, and that's not what we're about. But consciousness, conscious self, is not like that. To understand that one is a conscious individual, personal being is not a matter of belief or faith or religion. It is a fact, is the most fundamental fact of our existence. As he put it, inescapable component of reality. So this, I believe, is the revolution that is beginning to happen with accelerating speed in the world of science. Now, as far as evidence for a subtle mind element associated with the human organism that can influence ordinary matter in ways that go beyond what's possible to explain in terms of the ordinary physical laws, there is a body of evidence supporting that. This is Robert John and Brenda Dunn. Robert John was head of the engineering department at Princeton University. He and Brenda Dunn set up the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Group. They did experiments with random number generators. Random number generators are, how am I doing on time?
Got about 5-7 minutes.
Okay. So they did experiments with random number generators, which generate a random series of zeros and ones. If you let the machine run by itself, it'll generate 50% zeros, 50% ones. They recruited students to sit in front of the machines and simply will mentally that they produce more ones than zeros, or vice versa, more zeros than ones. And they did this for 10 years, with thousands and thousands of trials. And they found that the students were actually able to do it to a statistically significant degree. The There's also been scientific research into remote viewing, which many of you may know that the American intelligence agencies had contracts with companies that dealt with those issues, and they used it in their work. One of the people who was with one of these companies, Stefan Schwartz, was lecturing at the same conference I was lecturing at. So he came to my talk, I went to his, and he had a workshop in remote viewing. And I participated in that, and I was able to identify the target. Well, I won't go into all the details because I'm running short on time here. There's also been medical research into things that show consciousness can exist apart from the body, apart from the brain. Comes from medical studies of out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences during which the conscious self temporarily separates itself from the body and the brain and is able to consciously observe things that when the person is revived turn out to be verifiably true. And then there's the whole field of past life memories, which show that the conscious self can not only leave one body and re-enter the same body, but can leave one body and enter another body. The work of Ian Stevenson is very notable in that way. So in this process of reincarnation, there can be an evolution of the conscious self through the bodies of different species. But there's no evolution of the kind that Darwin imagined, where it's the physical forms that are transforming. So this is going deeper than Darwin. And the type of body that one gets depends upon the state of the mental body at the time of death. That's when the transition takes place to another physical body. And the type of body that one gets, because there are all kinds of different bodies, they're all vehicles for conscious selves. So there can be an evolution of the conscious self. And that leads to the idea, if we are taking our existence to be made of matter, mind, and consciousness, this leads to another idea, namely that we exist in a multi-level universe or cosmos, with a level dominated by ordinary matter, which is where we find ourselves now, and bodily vehicles made of ordinary matter. There's a dimension, a higher dimension of subtle mental energies and bodies made of that kind of energy. People call them by different names, gods, goddesses, jinn, devas, and there are different names for such subtle beings. And then there's the level of pure consciousness, which is where we all belong as beings of pure consciousness. In that sense, all of us are extraterrestrials because none of us are, as conscious, individual, personal beings, is from the world of matter. That's not our place. So, I mean, that sounds very strange, but there have been scientists who've lived fairly recently who've accepted such things. This is Dr. John Mack, who was a psychiatrist at the Harvard University Medical School. He wrote in his book, Passport to the Cosmos, it appears ever more likely that we exist in a multidimensional cosmos. The cosmos appears to be filled with beings, creatures, spirits, intelligences, gods. So basically, what I have concluded is that originally, as beings of pure consciousness, we're from that higher level of reality. It's possible to remain there, but if we depart from there and descend into the lower regions of mind and matter, we become covered by those energies, by those mental and gross material energies. And those coverings are what we call bodies. So there's a process by which we can restore consciousness to its original pure state, free it from its coverings of mind and matter. And that is the purpose, the ultimate purpose of yoga, meditation, prayer, contemplation, different spiritual disciplines in different traditions. I personally have adopted the practice of mantra meditation. I meditate daily on the Hare Krishna mantra, but I don't claim to have any monopoly on truth. I think truth can be found everywhere. It's like if you have gold, you could stamp it with the symbols of different nations, but if it's really gold, it doesn't matter what symbol you've stamped on it. So similarly, if I can understand I'm a being of pure consciousness, you're a being of pure consciousness, we're all beings of pure consciousness. There's no need to divide ourselves into competing, violently competing, sometimes groups, and on the basis of superficial characteristics of the gross physical body. We can focus on developing the resource of consciousness, and we can satisfy our material needs in the most simple, natural, efficient, and fair way possible. So thank you very much. These are some of my books. There we have a couple of them here. So, thank you. So what do we do now?
Thank you, Michael. That was really, really deep. Do you all agree with that? A lot to take from that today. Thank you so much. I think we can open the floor for a few questions now. Would anyone like to ask questions now? Please feel free. We have a few minutes now.
Hi, good evening, Michael.
Good evening.
Just had two questions. One of them was, I think they found a species of monkey in Indonesia somewhere, which is a black-faced, and they were like similar to not monkeys and not humans. And like I think two scientists went there, and then they got killed by that monkey group or something. And one of them even had some photos. If you could give some insight, if
this is the first time I've heard this case.
I saw it on like documentaries in National Geography or something.
And what country was this in?
Indonesia.
Indonesia.
So some American photographer or something, they went to capture an owl, but instead of owl, they had a guide, and those monkeys attacked them and killed, and one of them survived, and he was taken in prison because the Indonesian government thought he has killed those other people or something.
Yeah, well, it
So
is
that there were
possible.
some photos of
It is
some
possible
species.
that human beings can be killed by monkeys. In America, people have all kinds of unusual pets. Some people have kept chimpanzees as pets, but and this has happened. They can turn on you, and actually they're quite strong. You might think, oh, it's a cute little monkey, but it's
This is like, it looks,
a group of monkeys.
but not really monkeys. They were like, he's taken some photos or something that was there, and
Oh,
they
okay.
were like different, something,
Well,
but nobody's known or something.
kind of like a variety, an Indonesian variety of.
It's a black face, and it can jump from tree to tree, but it looks like a hairy human.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'll have to keep
I
my
saw it
eyes
like a
open.
long time ago, but it was like sort of relevant.
I'll
Uh,
keep my eyes open for that.
Secondly, about it's a little bit different from this topic, but it's relevant to archaeology. So I was, out of curiosity, wanted to ask about pyramids. If you could, little bit, because there's a lot of
Well,
that research and all that on. So I thought, if applicable, because it doesn't fit, but
yeah.
there are like different pyramids in different parts, like in South America and Egypt and anything. Even China has some more, sort of.
Well, you've kind of said it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I'm
like,
not primarily a pyramid researcher, but it's something I'm interested in because it's very hard to explain how those pyramids, like the Giza pyramids, were constructed. You know, recently I did a podcast with a man who has a collection of stone jars from Egypt. And this isn't maybe as exciting as the pyramids, but it's still a mystery. Like these stone jars, which are about like this high, are carved out of stone, like a block of stone, but their walls are very thin, very delicate. And it's just amazing. I saw a collection of 400 of these things. I had heard about them from John Anthony West, who was a alternative type researcher who specialized in Egypt. But I saw them for the first time, was able to hold them in my hands, and they are really amazing. Because if you try to give them to a modern stone worker, they would have a hard time duplicating them. So, somebody else?
There you go, microphone. I don't know if I need this, but so really, in a sense, one of the things you're saying is that science should be studying the archaeology of consciousness. Like I'm thinking of comparative religions and ancient artifacts that had goddesses and which were consciousness proponents. I mean, isn't that what religion has always been? Is an attempt to understand consciousness,
Yes.
and that the imagery that they have used is somehow like fertility goddesses and stuff. That they almost have their own consciousness, or don't know quite how to put it. I don't know where I'm going with it, apart from.
Well, I think you're onto something that's very important. Like I was pointing out, of course, I've written a whole book about this, human devolution, a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory, where I explain and get deeply into the cosmologies of different cultures, about 40 different cultures, widely separated in time and space. And they have so many common features. The idea that we're not accidental creatures in an accidental universe. We're part of a whole cosmic family of beings with different levels of consciousness and adapted to different types of energies. They said there are beings that have bodies made of more subtle mental and intellectual energies. We have bodies that are made of the chemical elements in the periodic table, but we also have beneath that our own types of mental bodies, and beyond that is the actual conscious self, which is identifying with that machinery. So in this picture of the cosmos, there can be, I don't want to use the word hierarchy, but there can be beings of different levels of consciousness who have different powers and abilities. So, yeah, I think you're onto something very important. And you were talking about religion, and I kind of skipped over this, but kind of in answer to your question about what religion is really about, or spirituality. This is a scholar of religion, and he wrote a review of Human Devolution, that book, in which he said, Cremo provides an extensive, thoroughly researched catalog of alien abductions, seances, paranormal apparitions, psychokinesis, and the like. It is all here. The remainder of this review, however, will not rehearse the standard skeptic arguments against such, but will rather focus on by what is far the most creative and imaginative part of human devolution, its concluding chapter on the Vedic theory of human devolution, which I kind of outlined in a very brief way. But basically it means as conscious individual personal entities, we don't evolve up from matter. In other words, matter doesn't produce consciousness, but consciousness can devolve or come in contact with mind and matter, become covered by them. So that is what I mean by devolution. And our purpose in life should be to restore consciousness to its original pure state, where it's not subjected to the limitations that we're undergoing on this level of consciousness and reality, which means to be identifying with a temporary bodily vehicle, be it the vehicle of a plant, an animal, a fish, a dinosaur, an eagle, a human being, a demigod or goddess. So that is, we started out talking about stones and bones and archaeology, but it naturally leads to these questions. Maybe somebody
I think
in
someone
the
at the
back.
back, yeah.
Like we're.
Thank you for the nice talk, Prabhu. I was wondering if you could share some light on Neanderthals' cognitive abilities compared to modern human.
Could I compare?
Neanderthals' cognitive abilities compared to modern humans.
Compared to, I
Modern
got
humans.
the compared to modern humans. I didn't catch the
Neanderthals. Yeah.
Oh, okay. There's been a tendency among some scientists for some time to see Neanderthals as really slow-witted, dumb, creatures who just lived a very crude life, But there are others who are doing research that, first of all, suggests that anatomically modern humans and Neanderthals are not really so distinct, that, for one thing, they interbred with each other, which normally, one way that scientists identify species is they don't interbreed with each other. So that's one thing. And then they've been attributing artwork found in caves in Europe that they previously thought were made by humans. They're now saying they were made by Neanderthals. Apparently, there have been studies showing that they buried their dead and made some offerings to them, like flowers and things like that. There's evidence that they cooked their foods. There's all kinds of evidence like that. And in my book, Extreme Human Antiquity, I mentioned that the distinction that some scientists make between anatomically modern humans and Neanderthals is based on physical characteristics like eyebrow ridges that are very pronounced. Many anatomically modern humans have a kind of smooth forehead. There's not a big bony ridge over each eye. What to speak of a bar that goes across the lower part of the forehead just above the eyes. So some scientists have observed that there are populations of living humans who have those features of their skulls, but they don't call them different species. There are a certain percentage of people who have those features. So based on considerations like that, I'm prepared to have an extended concept of what it means to be a so-called anatomically modern human. So thank you for that question.
Thank you, Mike. You talked about consciousness, and that is very prominent from the Indian subcontext. And we see hundreds of old-time temples and artifacts, especially from Afghanistan to Burma and India between, wherein there have been highly engineered products, like they have got melted granites, etc. But in the Indian context, we never see any skulls like you find them in Africa and China or even in Java and all that. Is that because there have been no archaeological digs of that sort or something like that? Any ideas?
There have been some skulls discovered in India, Narmada River skull for one. There have been some remains. One thing we have to consider is fossilization of bones is a rare event, because bone is made of bone protein, collagen, like any other organic substance. It's subject to decay, so bones decay after some time. It's very interesting. I mentioned chimpanzees a little earlier. The fossil record for chimpanzees was non-existent. Scientists had looked for fossil evidence of chimpanzees, which should be there according to their ideas, but they never found a single one until, I think, 2016, where finally they found one fossil bone that they regarded as being of a chimpanzee. So as far as the fossil evidence was concerned, chimpanzees did not exist, if you want to look at it that way. But one factor is that according some places where a species or a type of animal live are favorable for fossilization and some are less. A forest is not a good place for fossilization, either of chimpanzees or perhaps humans even. If humans are living in a forest area, they're not likely to be fossilized. Fossilization requires that the animal die in a situation where it's covered by some sediment, clay, or something like that, that prevents oxygen from getting to it and making it rot, or being in an extremely cold area. Like there's so many accounts of people finding frozen bodies of mastodons. You can actually get meat from it. And I'm a vegetarian, so I don't like to talk about these things, but they.
Perhaps we can have the last question here.
Thank you. Hi, Michael. Thanks for coming to Perth. I just wanted to go back to what you were talking about going between, say, the higher level of consciousness to mind and then to matter. And are you also suggesting that we can go from our current level to a higher level? And do you theorize that that is linear, or can it just be non-linear? So could we also, if we wanted to exist, say, from a higher consciousness to a lower one, could we then go back to a time before this?
Ultimately, yes, because time. This. Okay, sorry. There are things that happen. For example, there's a story of King Kakudmi, who had a daughter, and in the Vedic culture, and this is a long time ago, he was trying to find someone who would be a good husband for the daughter. And he decided to go to a higher level of reality. He traveled through the different dimensions with his daughter to the topmost material planet, the planet of Brahma, the chief demigod. And when he got there, the person who greeted him said, well, Brahma's busy right now. He'll be with you in a minute. So he waited a minute, and Brahma came, said, what can I do for you? He says, well, I'm considering different possible husbands for my daughter. I was thinking of King so-and-so or Prince so-and-so. Brahma starts laughing. So in the time you've been up here, the few seconds you've been up here, millions of years have passed on Earth. But when you go down, it'll be time for an incarnation, an avatar, Balaram. He'll be the perfect husband for your daughter. So they went back down. Millions of years had passed, and so yeah, things can happen like that. And in quantum physics, they notice things like that, strange behavior of matter in terms of time and space. Yeah, Einstein's theory of relativity also has distortions of time and space that result in things that people sometimes regard as paradoxical. Okay.
You just keep making it more and more interesting. I don't know if we should stop or we should continue. Would anyone like to ask okay.
Thanks for a very nice talk, Michael.
Thank you.
I'd like to make an observation and also a question at the end. So you made a very good point about how messy the scientific process can be by showing us, demonstrating clearly how the evidences are sometimes cast aside or they're not taken in the right light or whatever it is. Then you also gave us a very good example of when science can actually work by giving us the example of a dark matter being given as a potential a reason for the universe the way we see it. Now, thinking about it, that dark matter was conceived to understand the rotation of stars around the galaxy, but it also has other evidences to prove it. For example, the bending of light from distant sources. Now, the question that I'm trying to come to is the model that you have put forward for the consciousness to bring it into the scientific process. Have you considered the kind of tests that would be necessary to make that happen?
Yes. I'm associated with a group of scientists who are also followers of the Bhakti Yoga tradition that I am. And we're participating in the Science of Consciousness conference that's being held soon in Europe in July. And I've been presenting papers at that conference for a few years now. I'm presenting one at this upcoming meeting on actually something I mentioned this evening, Darwin and consciousness. I mean, what I'm doing is saying, given that in this domain of consciousness studies, it's kind of in a pre-paradigm state, to use Kuhn's terminology, where there's no one theory that has one general acceptance in that community. There are big divisions, which means the floor is open for proposals. So there's a group that I'm associated with that is developing something called the Atma paradigm. But it's not easy, as you know, but there is an opportunity there, and we've made some progress in being able to present workshops. I mean, there are different levels of participation in these fields, depending upon your credentials, your institutional affiliations, the opportunities for funding that you have, plus the persuasiveness of your concepts and ideas. So I recognize there is a lot of work to be done, but there is a field in which there is some opportunity. So we'll see how far we get with it. If you're in a minority position in the world of any field of science, you're faced with two realities, that sometimes a minority position becomes a majority, and sometimes it doesn't. So how do you recognize which minority voice or which minority opinion is going to be the one that has some likelihood of being the next one? That would be one that is able to solve a problem that has eluded the majority group for a long time. And there are huge problems that have eluded solution in that particular field. And so we'll make our attempt. How it comes out, I don't know. But we'll see. At least you have to have your foot or be in the game, be part of the discourse. So we'll see. I look at problems like in consciousness studies like the boundary question. Many cognitive scientists are becoming either panpsychics or what do they call them? Advaita types who believe there's one all-pervading consciousness, or that on a micro level, the atomic subparticles, the quarks, and have a little bit of a consciousness. But I think that really doesn't work, either of those ideas, because I don't experience my consciousness as a swarm of micro-conscious cells, like a swarm of bees. I don't experience all-pervading consciousness. And this is the boundary problem. If there's one all-pervading consciousness, why is my consciousness sort of limited and perspectival? That I have my perception of what's going on in this room, you have your perception. Anyways, don't get me started on this. Keep you here for days.
Are you writing a book on that? Are you writing a book on that?
I'm writing a book on almost everything.
I was wondering about that.
but I can't get them out. I really admire somebody like Isaac Asimov, who could write 6 books a year or something. It takes me a few years to get a book together.
Thank you, Michael. That was really, really wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.